It was 1:13 in the morning when I realized someone had been sitting at the foot of my bed and watching me sleep. I woke to the weight of eyes and the smell of someone else's cologne in a room that should have smelled only like laundry and cheap detergent. I was 26, living in a three-bedroom house outside the city with people I had met through a Facebook housing group. We split the rent because none of us could afford the city anymore. In the beginning, it was practical and almost friendly. Shared groceries, split utility bills, a whiteboard with chores that got erased and rewritten every week. But everything changed in the fifth week, when one roommate left without a warning and another started coming home hours after everyone else. The normal rhythm of our home fractured into pockets of silence and sudden noises that felt like tests of my nerves. We had agreed to the place because the landlord was lenient, and the contract was month to month. I worked nights at a delivery warehouse and slept mornings, so I knew the shuffle of keys and feet in the corridor, the low television hum, the sighs that travel through thin walls. My roommate list read like a small university department. Mark, the daytime barista who brewed bad coffee for everyone. Jenna, the grad student who always had a stack of books by her bed. Luis, the quiet developer who never left his room before noon. Carla, the landlord liaison who lived 2 blocks down and sometimes dropped by. And Ben, who sublet the spare room while he figured out where work would take him. Those names became daily anchor points, little currents in the same river of bills, chores, and late-night laughter. The house smelled of cold pizza, worn towels, and that industrial soap everyone used to pretend was fancy. We were not friends at first, and then, slowly, we were people who knew each other's patterns well enough to notice when one pattern changed. My backstory is the part I think about most when nights are quiet and I roll the events over in my head like a stone in my palm. I moved here because my last lease in the city doubled and because I needed a place that would let me keep my schedule. I did not have family nearby, and most friends were either married or renting couples who couldn't take another person. On paper, it looked simple: affordable rent, quiet neighborhood, quick bus to the warehouse. In reality, there were competing rhythms. Mark left at dawn to set up his coffee cart. Jenna studied with headphones that beat like a low drum. Luis coded with the door slightly open and an electric kettle always boiling. And Ben would sometimes play guitar badly until 2 in the morning. I had a small savings cushion and a cheap mattress, a backpack with a change of clothes for work, and a sense that as long as I locked the doors and kept my phone charged, I could manage. That confidence unraveled in pieces. There were tiny violations first. A drawer not where I left it, a shirt moved from the hook to the laundry basket, a spot on the carpet that smelled faintly of smoke. I blamed forgetfulness, the stress of roommates, the late nights. Then, one Thursday, I found my wallet neatly placed on the kitchen table with cash missing and a receipt from a diner 3 miles away for a breakfast I had never bought. That is when suspicion shifted from possibility to a slow, sure certainty. I started keeping my keys in my pocket even when I was home. I started checking the windows each night. I started listening for far-off headlights on the road that felt like the prelude to something unwelcome. The first signs that something was wrong did not look like a crime scene. They were small, domestic, and insistent. On Tuesday, I woke up to the creak of the stairs and the scent of cigarette smoke creeping through the hallway. I padded to the kitchen and found an ashtray on the counter that none of us used and a lighter we did not own. I asked Louis about it. He blanked, rough from sleep, and said he had not left his room. I felt foolish for asking, but the hair on my arms rose anyway. 3 nights later, I heard somebody humming under their breath as they moved around the house at 3 in the morning. The hum was close enough to the vent to vibrate the air, and far enough to make me think someone was walking the perimeter of the rooms, listening. I opened my door and stood in the corridor, the floorboards cool under my feet, the light from the porch lamp spilling like milk across the hallway. There was no one there. Later, I found footprints in the thin layer of dust by the back door that matched the tread of Ben's boots, but they led nowhere. Once, Jenna knocked on my door with a phone trembling in her hand. She whispered, "Did you leave?" And I immediately assumed I had sleepwalked or misremembered. Another time, my phone vibrated with a picture from Carla at 2:08 a.m.
It was of the mailbox with my name on it, taken from an angle that made it obvious someone had been standing outside my house watching. She wrote, "Saw this and thought of you," and then she sent a smiling sticker. The smile did not fit the picture. The house felt alive in a way that was not our living together. It felt observed. One night, I decided to follow a pattern. There had been a rhythm to the oddities. A car idling 2 houses down at 1 a.m., the thin smell of antifreeze in the driveway, the same pair of muddy prints by the side gate. I told myself I would
see nothing and be relieved. Instead, I found a man crouched with his back to the fence, his hands fiddling with a small flashlight, the beam catching the cheap chain link and making diamond shapes on his cheeks. He froze when I breathed. He was not one of us. He introduced himself as Theo, said he was waiting for a friend, and that he had lost his phone. We spoke, first in the nervous, slow sentences of strangers, and then in sharper, smaller questions. He answered Jenna with a softness that made me suspicious. He said he had been in and out of houses in the neighborhood, offering to fix boilers in exchange for a place to charge his phone. He smiled too much. His voice had a click to the consonants, like someone who repeated stories to themselves until they fit. I let him go because he left and because I wanted to be reasonable. That night, I locked the back gate 3 times. The escalation felt gradual until it was not. There were nights when I would wake to the sound of headlights moving slowly along the road, the horn faint and then gone, like someone testing if anyone was awake. I started keeping a small notebook on the nightstand to record times and sounds, names, and details. I wrote 0113, 0124, headlights, low car idling, far end of drive. I told myself it was an exercise in control. 1 week later, the man we called Theo knocked on Mark's door at 2:40 a.m. Mark assumed it was me playing a prank because we joked about each other all the time. He opened, and the shadow filled the threshold. The exchange that night became a study in small talk twisted into pressure. Theo said, "Hey, you awake? I need to use your charger." Mark said, "No, man, it is late and I am trying to sleep." Theo replied, "Come on, 1 minute, it will be quick." Mark said, "Go away." Theo said, "We are all human, help a guy out." Mark said, "Seriously, leave." The tone shifted when Mark reached for his phone. Theo laughed, a laugh that did not touch his eyes, and said, "That is not funny." Mark slammed the door. We debated calling the police. Mark thought it would be creating trouble. Jenna wanted to file a report. Louis said he would install an extra lock. Carla told us to be careful, and then, in the next breath, asked if she could borrow Mark's wrench. The conversation stretched through the morning like a bruise. We were not sure if we were paranoid or endangered. Around the 1/3 mark of my story, I want to pause and ask you something, because I need to know if this is just me or if other people notice the fraction of details that assemble into danger. Have you ever lived with someone and had a tiny thing happen that made you feel unsafe later? Start your reply. Yes, we did meet with the man. Yes, we started sharing our notes and a loose list of names we had seen around the neighborhood. We showed Officer Ramirez a map of the cars and the times, and he said he would increase patrols near our block, but to make a formal report if anything else happened. That promise felt like an anchor that did not hold for long. The confrontation night is the part I replay most because of how ordinary it felt at first and how sudden it turned. It was a Thursday and I got home from work exhausted, the smell of diesel and cold coffee clinging to my jacket. The house lights were off except for Jenna's room, her curtain a thin rectangle of lamplight. The corridor smelled like the leftover scent of someone frying garlic earlier in the day, like safe things. I walked to my room and found my window slightly ajar. The latch moved enough to let a thin slice of wind pass across the curtains. That is when I noticed the footprint on the sill. It was small, as if someone had pulled themselves up briefly and then back down, leaving a smear of mud and something I first thought was grease. I went to knock on Luis's door and found it closed. I heard voices then, low and urgent, not in any of our room tones. They came from the kitchen. I opened the door. The conversation in the kitchen was a flurry of people who never felt like my housemates before.
The man from the fence stood by the counter, his jacket damp. Ben was there, and he was quiet, eyes too fixed. Theo said casually, "Hey, I thought I could charge my phone, and I put the charger on the counter." I said, "You don't belong here. Leave now." He answered, "Calm down. We are just trying to stay warm." I said, "We have to call the police." He said, No, don't do that." Ben said, "Dude, seriously leave." He said back, "I am cold." I said, "You just walked in." He smiled that same empty smile and said, "You know how this goes." I said, "Get out of my house right now." He said, "You don't have to be like that." The exchange went on 6, 7, 8 times, the sentences sharp like matches struck in a dark room. Each reply seemed to turn the normal air metallic. At one point, he reached for the charger, and I moved in front of it, my palms sweating. Ben reached for his shoulder and whispered to him, "It is okay, man, come on." Theo shrugged Ben away as if batting at etches. A fly, and then in a movement that was at once slow and decisive, he leaned toward me and tried to put his hand on my arm. I shouted, "No," and pushed him away. The room went quiet, like a held breath. Then there was a knock at the front door and a voice outside saying, "Hey, is everything okay?" It was Officer Ramirez. The sound of his voice deflated the bubble of danger, like someone piercing a tire. Theo bolted out the back, and we heard him run along the fence, then down the alley, the creak of his boots, and then nothing. Officer Ramirez came in and asked questions, his torch carving light into the corners. I could smell his coffee breath, the leather of his jacket, and the faint antiseptic of the patrol car. He took notes. He told us to make a formal report. He said, "We will increase the patrol. Keep your doors locked." He left, and for a minute we all stood there looking at each other like people who had survived a small war. After that night, the house felt like a mixing bowl of logistics and emotion. The immediate action was practical and rushed. We packed a bag with essentials, ID, wallet, charger, a toothbrush, some clothes. I remember the weight of the toothbrush in my palm, a mundane talisman. I called Carla, and she came with a flashlight and an extra key for the front door. We called the landlord, and he said he would change the locks the next day. We wrote down everything for a formal report and took photos of the footprint, the ajar window, and the scuff marks on the sill. I sat in the car with my backpack on my lap and listened to Jenna talk about moving in with her sister for a while. Mark drove us to a motel with the engine warm and steady, the heater breathing out into the cold. We debated whether to stay the night or sleep at a friend's place. I remember the metallic taste at the back of my throat and the noise of the road like a river of other people's lives flowing on. We tried to be brave in short sentences. I said, "We will be all right." Mark said, "We just need to sleep." Jenna said, "I can't believe this happened." Luis said, "We should file with the police first thing." Ben said nothing and clenched his jaw. The car smelled of fries and the upholstery of someone else. The immediate consequences unfolded over the next 48 hours. I filed a police report at the precinct with Officer Ramirez, who took our statements in a room with a table scarred by years of files. He asked for names, for times, for any photos or videos. We handed over the notebook with my entries and the picture Carla had sent. The officer told us to get surveillance cameras if we could, and to register our concerns.
With the neighborhood watch, the landlord called and promised new locks and better outdoor lighting. A patrol drove by more often, and neighbors started leaving extra lights on at night. But there's a small cruelty to measures that are meant to repair trust. They are visible proof that trust was broken. I moved some of my things into Jenna's car and then later into a storage unit because I could not sleep in the house without imagining someone sitting at the foot of my bed again. We held a meeting with the group of roommates and neighbors named Mr. Alvarez, who lived 3 houses down, and Naomi, who walked her dog every morning, and Tony from the corner deli, who sometimes worked the late shift. Each person offered observations, names, and their own little rituals for safety. Mr. Alvarez said, "I saw a man looking into windows last week." Naomi said, "I always take a photo if someone is lingering outside." Tony gave us a discounted board for the back gate so we could block it at night. We did the sensible things people do when their sense of home has been bruised. Locks, lights, reports, patrols. We also did the things that were less sensible and more human.
We cried in the kitchen over burnt coffee, and we laughed at small jokes like, "Remind me to never let Ben play the guitar alone again." We tried to stitch the house back together with behavior. 1 month after the confrontation, I was still jumpy, but I had routines. I bought a small camera that sent alerts to my phone. I slept with the door slightly ajar and a book as a wedge because the noise of the house at night had become a new language I had to translate. Officer Ramirez called to tell me there had been similar reports 2 miles away and that a suspect description matched what we had seen, but he could not confirm anything yet. 1 month later, I met with Carla and we sat on her stoop as she explained that the landlord had been unresponsive to requests for better lighting for months until the police report. She apologized, then said she would personally coordinate the change and called a locksmith who came the next morning and replaced the deadbolt with a thicker lock and installed a motion sensor light over the back gate. 3 months later, the patrol patterns had changed. The local precinct had an increase in foot patrols and handed out flyers about stranger awareness and property checks. I received an email from Officer Ramirez with a subject line, "Follow-up," and a short paragraph saying that the area had seen a drop in incidents and that they were following a lead that might connect the man we saw to a series of break-ins 2 neighborhoods away. 3 months after that, I got a message from Naomi, who said a white van with tinted windows had been impounded by the police and that the plate matched a vehicle caught on camera in an unrelated case. She sent a photo with a thumbs-up emoji. The relief was partial and tasted like the first spoonful of soup when your throat is raw. 6 months later, the changes had settled into my daily life. I had moved out of the house into a smaller apartment in town with fewer roommates and more control. I replaced the cheap mattress with one that did not squeak, and I learned the small, expert habits of people who have been shocked into safety. Keeping a phone charged, knowing exits, sharing information with neighbors. I met with Officer Ramirez once more to give a statement that would be part of a larger file, and he told me that the investigation had led to arrests in a ring of people who had been preying on homes where the social fabric was loose. It was not the same man I had seen on my sill, but the fact that there had been organized activity in the area was a measure of vindication. 6 months later, I still locked every window twice and left a small lamp on a timer to mimic someone being awake. I visited the old house once to pick up a box of records, and the air in the hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the old coffee mark used to burn. The house had new locks and a brighter porch light, and neighbors who seemed to stand a little closer to one another. That closeness was both comforting and a reminder of what had been taken. I started therapy to deal with the hypervigilance and the recurring dreams where someone sits at the foot of my bed. I also started volunteering at a community meeting on tenant safety, sharing my notes and what we had done because small acts can prevent something bigger. People in the group asked me what I wished I had done earlier, and I told them I wished I had trusted my instincts sooner and that I had been more vocal about asking for better security. In the end, the story is not about dramatic rescues or cinematic chase scenes. It is about the accumulation of small things and the moment when a person decides they will not allow their home to be redefined by fear. I learned to place a camera, to keep a charged phone by the bed, to tell my neighbors when something felt off. I learned to name the people around me. Mark, who now runs his own cafe, Jenna, who finished her thesis, Luis, who took a job in another city, Carla, who helped us change the locks, Ben, who moved in with his sister, Officer Ramirez, who followed up more than once, Naomi, who walked her dog and kept an eye on the block, Tony, who fixed our gate cheap, Mr. Alvarez, who kept notes. Each name is a small anchor, a story that could have frayed further. If you have ever had a moment that made you rethink what safety looks like at home, tell us below. Share your experiences so others can learn what to watch for and how to act. If this story made you think twice about your own front door, consider subscribing for more real accounts and practical tips. And remember this, the place you call a home is worth defending with small, steady actions, not only big, dramatic gestures. Sometimes the bravest thing is to write it down, lock the door, and ask for help.